topic is media becoming a tool to subvert democracy. Yes, I am a witness to the decline of the media in India. For the last 40 years, I have been a witness because I have been an activist accidentally, taking up so many issues. And believe me, friends, the media which I knew earlier, they were more activists than me. In fact, they promoted my activism. They coined the word citizens against pollution. They were the people who were always interviewing and highlighting the issues. They were promoting activists to a big, even today, a section of the media is doing that job. But unfortunately, as we go into as we are a witness, subsequently we notice the rise of the corporates. And with this, they started purchasing the shares of the TV channels. And today, in India, it is the corporates who control the media. The corporates control the political bosses. I am very sorry to say that in India, like rest of the world, political parties have reduced themselves to being the dogs of the corporates. Very serious. We have to do something. We have the good work done by Jayapal Reddy Garu. It's not a joke, from Kalvakurti, Madgul to Hyderabad his journey has been fantastic. To Delhi, he was one politician who was always looked upon for ideas. When he spoke or whenever he used to speak, India would listen, because every word, it would convey a great message. There are many in this, particularly Pawan, who is also a product of Jayapal Reddy Garu. We are all a witness to that wonderful communication. And it's not just the speech. When Madam Gandhi imposed emergency, imagine the guts of the person who resigned. Just a resignation letter varation. That speaks about the personality. That kind of people we require today. He refused to blindly accept the pressure of the corporates when it comes to Krishna Godavari KG gas basin. He stood by the people, because the natural resources should not fall into the hands of the corporates. It is the wealth of the people. How can anybody, be part and parcel, helping the corporates? But unfortunately, friends, after 1991, we see the decline at the global level. Fall of Soviet Russia has come down very heavily, and the rise of the LPGs, and it had its impact on India. It had, and today you can see political decline completely. I am very sorry to say that the mainstream media in most parts of this country, they are controlled by political parties, and political parties through what a process known as investment they purchase the shares, and that is the end of the media. We have to, once again, we need to come together to revive the spirit of democracy. మీరందరూ దయచేసి జైపాల్ రెడ్డి గారు రాసిన బుక్ ఏది 10 ఐడియాలజీస్ మీరు చదవాలి. మాకేం చేసేది ఉంది, మేము బిజినెస్లో ఉన్నాం, రియల్ ఎస్టేట్లో ఉన్నాం, అది కాదు ఇష్యూ. ఎవ్రీబడి హ్యాస్ టు రీడ్. వన్ పాయింట్ ఈజ్ డెమోక్రసీ గురించి ఒక్క మాట చెప్పాలి. దిస్ ఈజ్ వన్ గేమ్ వేర్ ఎవ్రీబడి ఈజ్ ఎ ప్లేయర్. ఇప్పుడు క్రికెట్ అంటే జస్ట్ అక్కడో 11 మంది, ఇక్కడో 11 మంది ఉంటారు, కానీ అట్లా కాదు కదా, స్పెక్టేటర్స్ ఉంటారు. కానీ డెమోక్రసీలో స్పెక్టేటర్ రోల్ ఉండదు. Eternal vigilance is the price we need to pay in a democracy. And all of us have got to be vigilant అంటే మొదలు మనకు సబ్జెక్ట్ తెలవాలే కదా. నేను పొలిటికల్ సైన్స్ 52 ఏళ్ళ నుంచి చెప్తూ వచ్చిన, రిటైర్ అయినాక కూడా దాదాపు అదే పని చేస్తున్నా. డెమోక్రసీ గురించి కొన్ని వేల లెక్చర్స్ ఇచ్చిండవచ్చు, కానీ బిలీవ్ మీ ఫ్రెండ్స్, జైపాల్ అన్న రాసిన బుక్ డెమోక్రసీ చాప్టర్ అంత మంచి చాప్టర్ నేను మళ్ళా చూడలేదు. What a wonderful, he traces the history of democracy right from Athens, Vaishali నుంచి ఇప్పుడు లేటెస్ట్ వరకు. ఎన్నో అంత బ్యూటిఫుల్ డెపిక్షన్ ఈవెన్ వెస్టర్న్ పొలిటికల్ థింకర్స్ కూడా చేయలే. దిస్ హీ కుడ్ డూ బికాస్ హీ వాజ్ బోత్ గుడ్ ఇన్ ద థియరీ అండ్ ఆల్సో in practice.
The media, is it becoming a tool in the hands of either into the hands of power or the corporates? Is it subserving its purpose? That is the question before us. But incidentally, amongst the panelists, I am the only fellow with a media background. For last 30-35 years I am in media, but no way less than me, Neelima Garu and Narsana, is many a times they are making media pieces, means reporting the scenario situation prevailing in the state and country. Jaipal Reddy Garu is concerned, democracy is almost synonym for his political life. He was a true democrat and he used to love being a political professional, the perception and thought of democracy. If we consider these 2-3 elements which we now incorporated in the title of today's symposium, the media, democracy and Jaipal Reddy Garu, these three are a beautiful triangle with internally connected. Once he was telling with me, I shared with the professors many a times that he used to say that media itself is my constituency. I don't think any contemporary politician in this country claiming himself so associated with media and saying that media is my constituency, either in power or in opposition, whatever the political position, but he was the very media savvy and media persons. I was there in Delhi for 1 year in 2004 and 5 when I was heading political bureau for under the Delhi bureau for largest circulated Telugu Delhi Inadu. I used to go there. I used to sit with him for hours together. Lakshmaka is very much here. He used to get frequently repeated rounds of chai and snacks. He used to enjoy with spending journalists, and every year he used to organize one big lunch or dinner with the journalists in Delhi. I participated 2 such programs there in Delhi, and the fashion, the love he towards to democracy and democratic values. That's why democracy has to be strengthened with the supportive institutions like media. The sole purpose of media itself has to act as the bridging force between the people and the rulers. In the last 100 years, if we see in India, the contribution of media for the betterment of society in different dimensions and the sphere of the life, its contribution was a lot. And at the same time, over a period of time, I can give an example here. When Irom Sharmila, after breaking her 18 years of silence against that special powers to the army forces, she organized one press conference. So before that day, there was a leak from their team that she is entering into the politics. By taking that, after a long gap of 18 years, she is opening mouth and speaking something, there was a big gathering of media people, and one fellow posed a question to Shyamala that, is it true you are coming into politics? Then simply she said yes. Then his immediate question was that politics are so dirty. Then her sharp reaction is that, as of our society. So either politics or media, we cannot see it isolated by bringing it out of the society. The decline in everywhere, that is everywhere, the degradation of values, decline in the professionalism, efficiency, and its commitment and conviction towards its targeted and aims of that particular institution in this country. Similarly, we have to see the media, but media over a period of time, if you see the media 150 years back when British rule was there, subserving the purpose of British colonial ruler, hiding many things and revealing very limited amount of information into the public domain was the practice of media of that time. But the historic movement, the independent struggle, the media did tremendous and an historic job, which is the role model for the entire world. That sort of contributions was made by media in this country. Most of the freedom fighters, either they are the advocates at bar, or most of them the prolific writers of that time. Even Mahatma Gandhi used to say that two things I can quote for my lifetime in achieving this independence helped me. I utilized optimum those two. One is traveling a nook and corner of the country by using the railways. The second one is using the media to disseminate my thought process into the public domain for motivating them. These are the two he used to quote Mahatma. So like that, media, a tremendous job, but post-independence also in the early 60s and 70s up to in the middle of 80s, and just Professor was rightly mentioning that the LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization almost ruined the role of media in this country because of the lumpen capital is coming into this media. I can't speak much today against the media because I am there for last 30 years. I am everything there, so that's why my voice may not be louder against the media, but I will try to focus the positive side in strengthening the democracy. Democracy, we all, without any barriers and without any conditions, we have to love like the democracy, because democracy is the way for the entire world today for a better society. I would like to quote again Jayapal Reddy Garu as far as the democracy is concerned. Professor was rightly mentioning that all we must go with that book of great Sinha. Yashwant Sinha made an observation that without giving the title of the author, if anybody gives this book to me, I was in the impression that this by a renowned professor of international standard. But I know that this is by Jayapal Reddy Garu. That is the greatness of that book. In that, he says about the democracy, I will quote, despite repeated and continual setbacks in various parts of the world, democracy continues to have an undiminished appeal for people. Its popularity compels all sorts of rulers to promise electoral democracy. It's true that elections, when held, are often rigged and people are swayed diversionary ethnic slogans, but democracy as a political system is universally acknowledged. This is after centuries of evolution of process in the administration, ultimately which is largely accepted across the globe is the democracy. So that's why though we sometimes embarrassing situation we may face in this democracy because of numericals. Today all the political parties are after numbers. Today if you pick any newspaper today, either for the state politics or the central politics, they are like the generation today, the students marching after MARKS, Marx. Once it was after Marx, Karl Marx, but today the students going after the Marx, how many our child getting out of 198 or 99 or what that Marx. Today those numbers are becoming big figure in the minds of the political bosses today to how to develop our numbers, because unfortunately our democracy 49 is equal to 0 whereas 51 is equal to 100. That number game is there in the democracy. So 49 0 51 is 100 and the difference is 2 equal to 100. That's why all the political bosses today of ruling political spectrum is doing mockery of democracy. In that area, the media, by disseminating information into the public domain, it has to educate and motivate the people for defeating this sort of political approaches of contemporary political scenario. That media has to do tremendous role. We should not lose hope at this juncture, because for the media it's commission and omission, for its writing and not writing, for all these things, with the proprietary coming into the content management and disseminating information as they desired, and that interventions of proprietary. Earlier this was not there. When I came into the profession 35 years back, the scenario was totally different, but today the situation is totally different. For that, what is the remedy? We should not lose the hope. Again I will quote Jayapal Reddy Garu in his 10 Ideologies book. While concluding that book, he makes a beautiful observation. I again quote here, let hope trump over the despair. Hope should not be based on such an event as to the neglect negative assessments. Negativity can be countered by the nobility. Negativity can be countered by nobility. 500 years back, what Mahamantri Timmarusu did when Krishnadevaraya asked him to reduce this line without cutting it and simply drawing a bigger line beside. That sort of nobility should come, as the Rig Veda rightly says, let noble thoughts come to us from every side. All said and done, everything depends upon the thought. And elevating thoughts can potentially eliminate all threats to humanity by building a bridge, access to the great asymmetry. That's exclusively a chapter by Jayapal Reddy Garu, that asymmetry between the tradition of agrarianism and the transformation of industrialization. In the similar lines, I unquote here, and in the similar lines how Jayapal Reddy Garu produced a symmetry between the agrarianism and industrialism. Here the truth and the myth, that is a big widening gap here today, which has to be filled by the media by disseminating right information into the public domain with its true committed and conviction for the strengthening and healthy strengthening of democracy. Media has to do its role. The eminent speakers are here with their vast experience, can give proper inputs which can alter the media present day functioning and bringing that into the right track of media's role for the strengthening democracy. Thank you one and all.
Is media becoming a tool to subvert democracy? And I want to recast that question. I want to ask that question in a slightly different way. Because this question is an empirical question. Nobody has gone out and measured it as such. We have anecdotal evidence of our private experiences in society, which tells us that maybe perhaps media has indeed become a tool that subverts democracy. But a corollary question that we must ask is, can media become a tool to subvert democracy? And if indeed the answer to that question is yes, then what can we do about it? And that's the positive agenda, sir, that you're talking about. And a more core question that comes up related to this is, should we regulate free speech? And what is free speech? Free speech is the freedom that we enjoy to be able to say anything that comes to our mind or into our heart. Right? So, I mean, mansle unta cheppe freedom undalane, that is free speech. It's a value. But is it a value that we preserve in an unadulterated manner, or are there any limits to free speech is a key question, because free speech has tremendous advantages. It promotes creativity. We can't have innovation without. So in trying to answer that question, should we regulate free speech, let us first consider some of the great advantages of free speech and how, when free speech was compromised, it led to really tragic outcomes. The first example that I'm reminded of is what Jayapal Reddy Garu introduced me to. It's the historical fact of how Giordano Bruno, who was a heretic in Italy, was burnt at the stake. He was nailed to a stake and burnt in Italy in 1600. Right, and there was a Roman Inquisition. He was known to be a person who spoke against the grain of society, and he was basically burnt. He was publicly burnt. Why? Because he spoke the truth, and the truth was he supported the Copernican concept of heliocentrism. Almost everybody in the world believed that the suns and the stars went around the earth, but Bruno was one of the first persons to say, actually, we should support Copernicus. It's the planets which go around the sun and not the other way around, and that was a matter of truth. And he was burnt for that. The second example, again a favorite example of Jayapal Reddy Garu, is the example of Socrates. Everybody remembers, I remember seeing a book in his shelf in 14 Akbar Road, History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, and the cover of the book had Socrates drinking hemlock. A bowl of hemlock is a bowl of poison, because he was convicted to a death sentence by the people. So here is the very interesting question. The question here is that the democratic system of Athens those days killed truth. So it's not as if truth and democracy always go together. They have an uneasy relationship sometimes. So in trying to think that democracy and truth always accompany each other is also slightly misleading. They have a complicated relationship. And the people who voted for Socrates' death were the people of Athens. Why? Because the charge against him was that he had corrupted the minds of the youth, when he was actually speaking the truth, when he was actually speaking his heart and mind. And the third example that comes to my mind is that of Galileo, who also supported Copernican heliocentrism. He said that the earth actually goes around the sun and so forth, because he had invented the telescope, and empirically, observational empiricism was born because of him. He more or less gave the first piece of evidence to suggest that the earth actually goes around the sun. And the Ecclesia, the Medici authority, the church, the Roman Catholic Church, was visibly upset with him. They said, you have to recant what you have said, you have to take back your words. And that's what Galileo had to do temporarily. He of course came up with publications subsequently holding his position, but during that particular period, the ecclesiastical authority and the Medici family prevailed and subverted truth. Right? So power and power that is derived from democracy can also go against truth in some sense. So we need to bear that in mind. But let us look at the benefits of free speech. The method of science would not be possible without free speech. If you cannot sit in a seminar room of a university and challenge the propositions of a researcher and say that this could be false, if you do not have the freedom to falsify existing hypotheses, then you are basically subverting the methodology of science. So science itself, the very process of science itself, has to necessarily depend on the freedom that individuals should be given to challenge existing dogma, and that's a very important thing. And this position and this freedom to falsify the existing knowledge is called falsification, and this is a philosophy proposed by another great German philosopher, or rather Austrian philosopher, Karl Popper, who was again Jayapal Reddy Garu's one of his favorite philosophers. In point of fact, one day he recounted a debate that he had with Manmohan Singh ji, about an understanding of falsification. And I believe that Jayapal Reddy Garu has had a far more sophisticated understanding of falsification, the Popperian concept of falsification. So, in order to be able to falsify the pre-existent, you need to have the freedom. You need to have the freedom to speak your mind and your heart based on your individual experience. That's another point that I would like to bring for your consideration, I humbly submit it for your consideration. The next idea that I would like to submit in front of you, that I would like you to think about, is again based on Popper. Popper wrote this wonderful book called Open Society and Its Enemies. He criticized Plato, he criticized Marx, and he promoted the idea of an open society where people could be free. But yet, Popper said this about free speech. He said the following: a society that shows unlimited tolerance, if you have unlimited tolerance in society towards people with intolerant ideas, you are being tolerant. But if you are tolerant of people with intolerance, those people will come back and compromise the freedom of the tolerant. Right? And this is a paradoxical result that comes forth. So free speech, in some sense, according to Popper, needs to be regulated. If you did not regulate it, then what happens is that freedom itself becomes the antithesis of the very noble end that it seeks to pursue. And that's a deep, and it's a very subtle and a deep point. But if Popper himself, who was a liberal, who promoted free society, said that we need to regulate free speech based on that, I think it merits some attention. Moving on, I would like to talk a little about the role of digital media. There are three broad paradigms. I think some of the deepest problems that we are facing in society are on account of the all-pervasiveness of digital media and the role, for instance, that it has played in almost subverting American democracy. Everybody now is a witness to the images of what happened on January 6th of 2021, when all those people, based on false information, marched to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. and nearly subverted the very foundation of democracy by trying to continue with Donald Trump. Right? This is the post-truth phenomena. What are the three paradigms of digital media? The first paradigm was one of where you had one person, this is the traditional media, and one person basically communicated with multiple people. As a child, I remember sitting and reading the Hindu or the Indian Express. It came from one source, it came to multiple people. The person in the chai shop also read that. If you were to go to Kerala, a lot of democratic discussion happens in the little panda bus where people sit and read the newspaper and smoke their cigarettes. Right? So it's that phenomenon, that paradigm is characterized by one to many. And so the scope for influencing the minds of the many is somewhat limited because the cost of monitoring those few people who disseminate that information is much lesser. Why there are few identifiable people, you can go regulate them. So the cost of regulation is lesser. I'm speaking now from an economic point of view. Then we move to the second paradigm with the advent of the internet, which is you had multiple people communicating with multiple people. Everybody was a producer of his or her own truth. And that became seriously problematic. It unleashed the forces of e-commerce, it unleashed the forces of market and so on, and creativity as well, and great poetry and so on. But it created a fundamental problem, and that is, now suddenly instead of the few people, the newspapers which produced the truth, you had millions of people producing their own varieties of truth, and it became practically, from a regulatory point of view, impossible to monitor all their behaviors. There was this wonderful New Yorker cartoon, sir, which showed two dogs talking with each other in front of the screen of an internet, and one telling the other, when you're on the internet, nobody can tell that you're a dog. The foundation of digital communication is based on this principle of anonymity. Anonymity makes digital communication far more efficient than a system where you have to authenticate identities. But this raises a problem from the point of view of regulability. You can't regulate if you don't know who the person it is who has spread that information. And that's a deep challenge of the internet age. And now we move forward to a situation, the third paradigm, which is still many to many, but a few people now are beginning to use this new methodology called artificial intelligence and machine learning, which allows people to segment the population into smaller groups of people. So if, for instance, you have a certain set of preferences, if you like a certain type of toothpaste, or if you like watching certain types of movies, or if you like consuming certain types of media output, it is likely that you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or you belong to a certain political ideology. And based on that individual targeting, you're able to now direct certain messages which can impact that behavior. And one of the great examples of how this was exploited is the example of Cambridge Analytica. Right? Cambridge Analytica became the basis for Trump's victory in United States. So the role of freedom of speech became highly dubious in America. I mean, the very foundation of Donald Trump is free speech. And the moment now Twitter and Facebook and other media companies started withdrawing that freedom, there's a massive backlash from the libertarians to say that how can you impact free speech, right? So it's a double-edged sword. Free speech is a double-edged sword. In the hands of the truthful like Copernicus and Socrates, free speech is wonderful. But in the hands of the Donald Trumps and the people who, for instance, were trying to purvey hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin during the pandemic, it's dangerous. So how do you resolve this debate? I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you very much.
My tributes to Sri Jaipal Reddy Garu and my respects to Lakshmi Garu and also the eminent people on the panel here. All of them an inspiration. It's an honor to be here. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to meet Jaipal Garu. I had taken a break from academics. I left JNU. And I said, I want to know the real realities of India. Not from the libraries, not from research, but in real terms. I wanted to know the texture of India. And therefore, I became a journalist to actually write about the unseen distress of people. And to be a catalyst, I hoped, of transformative change. I said there will be change if you write about these issues. If you write about issues which nobody wants to know, like the farmers or the women labor. These issues which will never be written in newspapers or shown on television. People warned me then also कि भाई journalism कादम्मा ये रास्ता journalism से नहीं होगा. They told me ఈ రాస్తాతో పోతే మీకు ట్రాన్స్ఫర్మేటివ్ చేంజ్ రాదమ్మా, మీరు తప్పు చేస్తున్నారు, టైం వేస్ట్ అవుతుంది మీది, మీరు అకాడమిక్స్లోనే కంటిన్యూ చేయండి, ఇక్కడ ఏమైనా అవుతుందేమో, అక్కడ ఏమో కాదు, జర్నలిజం ఇస్ నాట్ ద వే. బట్ అఫ్ కోర్స్ మన పాత అలవాటు ఏంటంటే సంబడీ సేస్ డోంట్ డూ ఇట్, యూ వాంట్ టు డూ ఇట్, యూ వాంట్ టు రియలీ ఫైండ్ అవుట్ వై ఆర్ దే సేయింగ్, మేబీ వీ కెన్ చేంజ్ దే మైండ్. అండ్ ఐ ఆల్సో బిలీవ్ that journalism is not good or bad. It is journalists who are good or bad. So that's what I believe. So that's where the journey began. And in the middle of the journey, maybe, perhaps in the beginning itself, while covering national politics, I met Jaipal Garu. He was the principal voice of the main opposition party at that time. This was between 2002 and 2004. And I was fascinated by the way he would position an issue, analyze an issue. He brought purpose to everyday politics. There was historicity. There was context which was universal. There was end to end, from where knowledge began, perhaps, where consciousness began, end to end understanding of an issue or a topic or a problem. So for that brief period of time, when we were having those discussions, I felt that perhaps that transformative change I was looking at was possible. అప్పుడు నాకు అనిపించింది ఇది అవ్వచ్చు, నేను ట్రై చేస్తుంది పాసిబుల్లీ అవ్వచ్చు. బట్ దట్ వాస్ ఫర్ ఎ brief period of time. I want to just highlight that point. Now this was also the time which was important because here was an opposition party which was trying to highlight the misgovernance of the ruling party at that time through solutions, rights-based approach, concepts like Bharat Nirman. That's what the opposition party was trying to do. And who was helping bring out these inadequacies in the governance? The media. It was not because media was siding with this or that. Media was doing its job of trying to say that, okay, this is a problem not being handled correctly. Let us find a solution. These are some of the solutions. You may agree, you may disagree, but at least the media was talking about these things. That's why there was a space created for the democratic change which happened. Because voters had a choice to choose between this option, this model, that model. That's what the media did. It presented both sides, or all sides, let us put it this way. So, now this is what was also very critical from that time when Jayapal Garu was so active on the national stage, very critical role which he played during that time. The media, I don't think what the media did then and what media does now, there is a difference. And let's look at what is the difference and what can be, let's examine that. Now, as the topic today says, that has it become a tool? There is one version, of course, which says that yes, it has become a tool which can be used by anyone, not just those in power, those with money, those who can influence. And there is another side. There are a set of arguments. I'm going to balance, Dilip Garu, what you said and what Professor Saab also said, that let's balance both sides of the story and see where is the truth. Let's examine where is the truth. Okay. So on one side there is this thing that media has become entirely submissive. Okay. Though what are the arguments which you get from inside the media industry on why is media behaving this way? And let me share some of those things. Ante media వాళ్ళ గురించి వాళ్ళ కండక్ట్ గురించి ఏమంటారు? When we say that why don't you report the truth? అప్పుడు వాళ్ళు ఏమంటారు? And please correct me if I am missing any points. First reason is that media too has families. మాకు కూడా కుటుంబాలు ఉంటాయి, మాకు కూడా పనులు ఉంటాయి, మాకు కూడా రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీస్ ఉంటాయి. How are we going to pay the checks? We need the paychecks. And that's why we do what we are asked to do. Now, humbly, there have been families before. There were bills being paid before also. At a time when media used to stand up against the government, వాళ్ళు అప్పుడు ఫ్యామిలీస్ ని పోషించే వాళ్ళు, వాళ్ళకు కూడా they had families. I come from one such family. The second reason is that media today is under tremendous pressure from political parties and businesses who push them to follow a particular agenda or a particular argument. Correct? But it మొదటిసారి అవట్లే. This is not the first time it's happening. It used to happen before as well. In fact, media can never operate in a void. Media vacuum lo pan cheyaledu. If it does, it becomes irrelevant kada. So it has to be in the middle of this pressure. Only media has to operate and succeed in telling the truth. Third, the audience has changed. News has become entertainment. Well, sorry to disappoint, but news has always been entertainment. Always. From the point where the headline is framed to the point where the text is structured, every word is chosen to engage the audience, sell the product. ఒక న్యూస్ పేపర్, టీవీ ఛానల్, మ్యాగజైన్ అమ్ముడు పడకపోతే దాని న్యూస్ ఎవరు చదువుతారు? So everything is designed to attract and reach out to you so that you can read what is being said. So yes, it has always been a product, and yes, it has always been entertainment. So nothing new there also. Fourth reason ఏమంటారంటే money has become central. అందుకనే now we are not able to do what we want to do. But money has always been central to news. News has always been a business, and a very good business. I mean, why would anybody invest in a news organization, a channel, or a magazine under the present structures? Why would they invest if they do not make profits? How will they pay the paychecks? How will they pay the employees to work? So what has changed? If these things remain the reasons which the arguments which journalists give, and we see that there is no difference between, let's say, these problems existed before also. But how come those people, those times saw a courageous journalism, and today we see what we see? A submissive, a surrendered kind of media. There are some things which are special to news, and one of it is self-regulation. That is what is special to news, and that is what used to happen before. Journalism mundara self-regulate cheskunevallu. They made their own rules, and few rules I'll talk about. There are more, but just want to point out some things avi ippudu ee kalamlo levu. First rule, there's always bias. News always has bias. So because enduku bias undi? Why is there bias? When you look at news, మీరు ఏ న్యూస్ చూసినా కూడా దానికి ఒక చూడటానికి పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూ ఉంటుంది. So it is the observation of it always will have bias. Now it depends on how much is being included in your news story, and మీరు choose చేస్తున్నారు. As a journalist, you are choosing what is being written and what is not being written. Which point of view are you presenting? That you are choosing, right? That depends on the journalist and the news organization where it is being presented. So bias is inherent in news, in journalism. Therefore we have a concept of balanced news. You have bias, it is inevitable. How do you deal with it? You include as many points of view as possible so that the audience, the reader, has the option, the choice of either choosing one or two of them, or at least getting to know that there is not just one point of view, there are 5 points of view. So that మీరు ఆ bias ని counter చేస్తున్నారు. That's how you balance. That's the job of journalism, that you balance that bias. Now, most important thing దాంట్లో ఏమైంది, that when you express the bias, or when you said that there were so many different point of view, what happened then was the bias of the journalist got neutralized. The bias of the organization got neutralized. And that is why eventually we arrived at truth, because there was exploration possible. మీరు ఎక్స్ప్లోర్ చేయగలరు, ఒక ప్రాబ్లంకి సొల్యూషన్ ఏమిటి అనేది ఎక్స్ప్లోర్ చేయగలరు. That exploration was possible because these various points of view, diverse points of view were expressed. Now the third and the most important rule was a journalist was feared by those in power. In fact, to the extent that they were hated by those in power. And that was a medal of honor. Because if a journalist was preferred, a favorite of a government or those in power, that was seen as a drawback. That was seen as a negative factor about the journalist. This is a very important characteristic. Because why is that? Because a journalist must show the mirror to the government on where it is failing. The journalist had to have the strength to face the ire of the government, because there will be a pushback in case you tell powerful people that what they are doing, expose what they are doing. There will be a pushback. The journalist had to have the strength, organizations had to have the strength to stand against that level of pushback from the government. The ministers, those who were holding important positions, had to be worried about journalists. That was the definition, that was the characteristic of a journalist. And that happened only because of one major reason, that the journalist had to be herself or himself above temptation. to an extent that they had to be respected by even the governments whom they criticized. That's rule number 3, or at least self-regulation rule number 3. Now, but today's journalism is an arena without these self-regulation rules, or in fact any other rules. News on primetime TV especially avoids issues like price rise and employment. And why do I say TV? Is because one half-an-hour slot, as we all know, is seen by thousands. In a week, one anchor show is seen by lakhs of people. So it's very critical to understand what TV debates do, what kind of help they do, if they do any, and what kind of damage they do, which they do. Issues that create negative image of the government are neutralized. And I'm not telling something which all of us here don't know. Whichever side of the debate you are on, you know this is what happens. Negative image is minimized. Opposition protests or any protest against the government are discredited. Attacks on institutions, which we are seeing rampantly, are trivialized. So it's not just post-truth, it is now post-fact. Why? Because governments don't inform journalists, and journalists don't ask questions from the government. So between the government and the media, there is full cooperation, there is full coordination, kalisi melisi done, and there is also full collusion and sometimes even surrender. Now, we have to talk about the digital media because it's been referred by earlier speakers as well. It's very important, and I'm actually happy to some extent. I like the anonymity of digital media. How else do you tell truth in this country? And as a woman, I know how difficult it is to tell the truth. I'm an author and I do research on gender and women, and still I'm not able to 100% tell the truth or the issues, fully explore the issues of women in this country. So I know what it means to be unable to tell the truth. And therefore, I like the anonymity of the digital space to be able to tell the truth. Regulation, yes. But regulation in the hands of government, no. Any regulation has to be self-regulation when it comes to either digital or the print or the electronic media. So, let me just briefly talk about my research and then I'll end. I head an institute in Delhi. It's called Institute of Perception Studies. What we do is research rural and urban distress and role of media in democracies. This is, if you remember, that was the beginning of my journey also. That's where I started, hoping to write about distress, hoping to write about stories which nobody will care. And today I research about that and try to find out how and why, how basically we can put the focus back on these issues and how to do it. Very important. So as part of that, we have a media research wing to it. It is called Rate the Debate. We study things which even the Supreme Court says we don't have the structure, and we humbly have submitted our research to them. Bias, hate speech, derogatory language, any level of unbalanced news reportage, all this we study in this institute. So broadly, there are 4 general pathways of creating perception in media according to our research for the last 4 years. Number 1 is subjective focus. Ante ఒకటే చోట, even if you have so much of data and topics, అయినా కూడా you selectively choose certain issues to highlight on media only. మీకు తెలుసు, the media knows, the organizations know, and the audience and the readers know there are 15 other issues of equal importance and sometimes even more important than the issue which is being highlighted. And that is number 1, which is subjective focus. Pathway number 1 to make perception at an industrial scale. Ante image building at an industrial scale. That's how it is made. subjective focus. Number 2, risk amplification. TV anchors repeatedly use certain words and connotations to amplify risk and to justify negative perception. I have some examples. I'll just explain how risk amplification. Ante risk ni exploring it, making it multiple. Pattern creation. Events are shown not as isolated happenings but as deliberate pattern. Pattern creations can also happen in some very which can lead to dangerous outcomes. Negative forecast. This is the fourth and the last pathway, which is based on assumptions, anchors envisage a negative future. And unna paristitini batti prediction. How do you make a prediction? Most of these cases lo negative prediction. Negative prediction has a response from the audience. The audience feel insecure, and that's the insecurity which is generated through negative prediction. Now let me give you some examples of this methodology in action. So number 1 is language analysis. First method is language analysis. For instance, you recall the farmers' protest on the borders of Delhi over 1 year. They were sitting on the roads, more farm laws, so they wanted these 3 farm laws to be repealed. So at the time when the farmers' protest was happening, even I went there and I could see they were sitting in extremely difficult conditions on bare roads, open roads mida. Chala kastanga akkada vallu they were fighting one of the most historic battles India has ever seen. And of course they won. But how did the media present them? That's what we were also watching. How did the media present the farmers' protest, which was happening just a few kilometers away from their studios in Delhi? So they did go there. I mean, I'm not saying that they were just sitting in the studios. Obviously, they went to the spot. They'd seen the farmers. They interacted with the farmers. And how did they report? According to our language analysis of anchors from several Hindi and English channels, national channels, the most used words to represent the farmers were Khalistani, toolkit, urban Naxal, Badnaam, Deshdroh, Rashtravad, Andolan Jeevi. These are some of the words. There are more, but what I'm trying to say is these words were not used once. That's why I read the 4 pathways of making perception. Ela tayar chesaru perception valla gurinchi. Okkasari analedu idi. They were not just mentioned once in passing. They were mentioned repeatedly till you made up your mind, so that when now I ask you what were they called, you said Khalistani. Because you remembered. This is the power of media. On one day, February 5th, 2021, on a particular channel, the word Khalistan and Khalistani were used 37 times. And this is a 25-minute program. That is the intensity with which media creates perception. Second method of our institute is called prime time tracker. Equally important, what we do is we all understand what is prime time. Prime time is a time during a particular channel's entire day when the channel believes that the maximum number of people are watching their shows. So that goes into hundreds, thousands, and as I said, if you put the cumulative numbers in a particular week, it can go up to lakhs of people watching that particular segment of news, debates on TV. Now, in 2021 September, I must say before that this is a very difficult task of watching and measuring prime time. Lakshala seconds మేము దాన్ని చూసి దాన్ని రీసెర్చ్ చేయాలి. సో our team researched 6 lakh seconds in August, September 2021. And what did we find? What we wanted to look was that what was the issues on which people were being diverted? Yala divert chestunar attention. We wanted to really research that. 18% of topics, only 18 out of the 6 lakh seconds, only 18% of topics were on, and 18% of the time was on topics like education, health, rural India, farmers, infrastructure. What was the 82%? Migita 82% lo em maatladukunnaru vallu? Political fights, promotion of certain political leaders, opposition ni, criticizing the opposition for what they were doing. This was what mainly was happening. Anyway, the third method we have, by the way, all this research is available to all of you on our website. It's a simple website, Institute of Perception Studies, ipsdelhi.org. So anybody can see, it's free access. Third method we research is speaking time. We just talked about bias. We just talked about balance. So if there are 5 different points of view on a particular issue, it could be any issue, then gurinchi 5 points of view unte, you call 5 speakers to the studio, each one representing each point of view. And you have all of them sitting in the studio and the anchor begins their talk. But what if the anchor doesn't invite 3 of them and invites just 2 of them to talk, or the anchor invites everybody to talk but doesn't let 3 of them talk, and and only some panelists are allowed to talk. So we decided to research speaking time, interrupting the flow of a panelist's talk. The second is obviously not giving enough time. So on a critical issue like post-COVID, around August, September 2021, this nation was deeply distressed. We were all trying to grapple with COVID, also our life returning to normalcy. 64% of the time given to pro-government panelists and just 29% given to anti-government panelists. I don't say pro-government, anti-government as in just a matter of criticism kadu. I'm talking in the context of COVID preparation, COVID issues. Our COVID management time lo, how many people were criticizing the government? Valaki just 29% of the time, of the total time, and 64 to those who thought the government was doing a great job. That was speaking time analysis. The fourth method we have is now popularly known as the thin red line. This popular endukayindante, it's only in a pie, when you create a pie chart, the thin red line is the only time in a news debate that relevant issues are talked about. Oka chinna patla line, that's all there is. So in from March to May 2022, we analyzed this for price rise. As we all know, this year is marked by some of the most steep increase in prices, inflation across the country. We analyzed 2 lakh seconds, out of which just 10%, never more than 10% on any channel was spent talking about price rise. One example, on May 7th, LPG is the cooking gas, we all know. Every household uses that, especially the poor depend on it very intensely. Out of the 26,000 seconds of footage on May 7th on TV debates, which include both Hindi and English national television channels, 65% of the time was spent talking about communal issues. The breakup of the communal issues are on my website. I don't want to waste time. I just have few minutes. Can you guess how many seconds were spent talking about price rise out of the 26,000? Just 44 seconds. 26,000 seconds of coverage and just 44 seconds. That's 0.16% of the time was spent on talking about prices, which impacted every citizen of this country. Now to conclude, Democratic values and constitutions find no space on TV today. And if this continues, the very definitions which we stand by will be lost forever. Communal harmony, justice, equality, representation, what do they mean anymore? And to some extent, when Professor Saab was talking about the colonial free speech and all, I was thinking, is this a recolonization of the media? Is that what we are seeing today? So what is the way out? So this we know, we have been able to measure. What is the way out? దీనికి solution ఏంటి? To my mind, I humbly have one suggestion. Empower the audience with doubt. Doubt is your only and the best defense. Doubt supported by research. That's the filter we need. Because all of us have a fact checker in us. మనమందరికీ తెలుసు నిజం ఏమిటో. Because we have our conscience, we know the truth. We can fight the truth. And that, I humbly submit, is the solution, that people aware, alert and vigilant, they are the best way to reclaim our democracy. Thank you.
It's an honor to be here speaking on the occasion of Sri Jaipal Reddy Garu Memorial Foundation event. Today I would like to begin with a few comments about, I don't want to even look at the title, whether media is subverting democracy, but I would like to sort of begin with the philosophical question that Professor Pawan raised, the dialectic of free speech and press freedom. To that end, I will connect with some of the work, the 1970s UNESCO debates that happened in tricontinental debates. Well, Sri Jaipal Reddy sir was, I think, a key player in the Prasar Bharati bill that subsequently, beginning with the 70s, he was sort of instrumental in providing the debates, media autonomy, and other important things that, for instance, with so many committees, whether, committees like Chanda Committee in 1960s, Varghese Committee in 1970s, Joshi Committee in 1984, and we all remember in 1982 television broadcast media was, inaugurated with the Asian Games. So the debates about media autonomy actually, Sri Jaipal Reddy is a key player there. First as an INB minister, and then later also in I.K. Gujral's government. He was the key player. If you guys would like to, I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but if you would like to look at that, I have a book that was published by the Cambridge University Press on media in India, Doordarshan and All India Radio, looking at that broadly philosophical look at the evolution of media. There I have a chapter on media policies and debates, beginning with Jaipal Reddy's work and the political discourse, and then looking at the legislative agendas and all of that, Sen Gupta and others, Supreme Court 1996 decision on public. Now, in my presentation today, I would like to focus on two things here. If we all remember, we all know that the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021, two journalists, right? Maria Ressa, I'm just reading here, uses freedom of expression to expose abuse of power, use of violence and growing authoritarianism in her native country, the Philippines. Today we have the Junior Marcos in Philippines. Duterte is gone, but you have equally dangerous individual. So she was key in sort of developing that investigative journalism. She was the CEO of Rappler digital network, and free expression was critical for her, looking at Duterte's regime of controversial, murderous anti-drug campaigns and all that. And then you have Dmitry Andreevich Muratov. Two people shared the Nobel Peace Prize 2021. He was a journalist who defended the, again, free speech, freedom of expression in Russia under increasingly challenging conditions. So these are, I think, exemplary examples of high quality journalism, investigative journalism. I would like to sort of give a sense in which even Mahatma Gandhi, there's a fascinating book by Isabel Hofmeyr called Gandhi's Printing Press, Experiments in Slow Reading. Just read that little blurb here. You begin to see how Gandhi's young mind, and as Pawan was talking about, his ability to sort of use the printing press to great effect, apart from traveling in railways. At the same time, Gandhi, as a young lawyer in South Africa, began fashioning his political philosophy. He was absorbed by a seemingly unrelated enterprise, creating a newspaper. He was a sometime proprietor of a printing press and launched the periodical Indian Opinion. The skills Gandhi honed as a newspaperman, distilling stories from numerous sources, circumventing shortages of style, influenced his sparse prose style. Operating out of the colonial Indian Ocean press, Gandhi saw firsthand how a global empire, the British Empire, depended on the rapid transmission of information over vast distances. Gandhi sensed that communication in the industrial age was becoming calibrated to technological tempos. But he responded by slowing the pace, experimenting with modes of reading and writing focused on bodily, not mechanical rhythms. Favoring the use of hand-operated presses, he produced a newspaper to contemplate rather than scan, one more likely to accept thorough than feature easily glossed headlines. So that was Gandhi's work. Just a few words about, since it's Jaipal Reddy's Memorial Foundation, I wanted to say that they don't make MPs like that anymore. A very reflective, philosophical oriented MP like Jaipal Reddy, I can remember in the United States, despite the differing opinions we have, John McCain, or we have Dick Lugar, who was, Republican senators who would debate and discuss policies with a certain basic minimum understanding of reasoning. And that was, I think, very crucial. And Jaipal Reddy's work is emblematic of that. He was connecting with ideas of democracy, and I would refer to his book, 10 Ideologies. The chapter on democracy is fascinating. If you were to look at very condensed, neat, elaboration of how democracy, not just in Greece, but also in Vaishali and other places around the world. Now, let me get to the debates of 1960s and 70s. We all know that 1919, Woodrow Wilson, that the first, the mandate system, the Wilsonian moment. There is a book by Erez Manela which talks about Woodrow Wilson's 14 points in the League of Nations that he developed with Jan Smuts. Now, Jan Smuts was a guy who was in South Africa where Gandhi has to deal with him, right? So he, they don't invite Gandhi to the Paris 1919 convention because they knew that this Gandhi would create problems for them, trouble for them. And as they were developing the League of Nations or the liberal internationalism, which is again a problematic idea of liberal internationalism, we'll get to that in a little bit. And the most important thing is about decolonization, self-determination to be precise, that Woodrow Wilson invoked in that 1919. And many of those countries, India, including India, Egypt, China, Japan, quickly grabbed Ho Chi Minh and others, from Cambodia and Vietnam. They were sort of understanding that this first time that we will have the home rule and all of that. So it was a global ethos within which people were talking about it. 1947, Harry Truman and decolonization decades, then the Cold War geopolitics, all of that have shaped the rise of the whole idea of the free speech and press freedom. Now, press freedom is very crucial for many of those non-Western societies, particularly Global South, as you will remember, Africa, Latin America, South America, and also India. Within that, UNESCO was at the forefront in the debates about free speech and press freedom. Now, free speech, as we all know, it has a very peculiar beginnings. I'm writing a book presently on the global intellectual history of free speech. I'm looking at freedom and liberty from non-Western perspectives, looking at India in the Sanskritic traditions and looking at Persian usage of the word and even in other languages. Quite a broad set of ideas, about what constitutes freedom and how free speech developed in the context of England, where the bunch of parliamentarians, they didn't have access to free speech, and of course, drawing from John Milton's Aeropagitica, where free speech itself, as adumbrated by John Milton, was in a way exclusionary. It would not include Catholics, it would not include Turks, it would only include certain groups of people. So John Milton's idea of free speech was problematic from the start. And when John Adams and Tom Jefferson in the United States borrowed those ideas, and from even John Locke's private property and all that, they developed the whole idea of free speech. It was already in itself deeply troublesome. Of course, Bruno and others would use it to great effect, but there is always a political problem with free speech. There is a great debate in terms of the jurisprudence in the United States. Great lawyers and great judges have sort of elaborated some marketplace of ideas and other kinds of things, which is again very powerful. We lack that in India, the jurisprudence of free speech and press freedom. You will see that the whole history in the United States. Now quickly to the debates. Bandung 1955, G77, the free flow of information. Press and radio were at the forefront. Press is in a way the press of writing, right? Meaning it's not about digital media, which comes much later, broadcasting and all of that. So press became a crucial thing. Community media was big in third world countries, and there were again debates, political debates within Bandung, Nehru, Tito, and others, Egypt, Nasser, who were doing, the meetings in Indonesia, Jakarta. That was a famous debate there. So the whole idea of the third world, in the 1970s, the new Information Economic Order, NIEO, which was substituted by New Information International Economic Order. Information becomes an important thing here. And then we had the rise of the ICTs, information communication technologies, in France and in the United States. The whole discourse of telematics, microelectronics, private corporations became big there. And then the crucial debate between Friedrich Hayek and Keynes, welfare capitalism on the one hand, and libertarian corporate libertarianism, that seemed to be at play in the 1930s and 40s, that defined what freedom of the press meant. Freedom of the press from the state, because if you look at again the definition of two concepts of freedom by Isaiah Berlin, negative and the positive concept of freedom that he has articulated, the liberal philosopher, that you will see that it is problematic because it is lurching towards the market forces, the privatized corporate, the world, the capitalism, for instance, which Hayek and others have elaborated. So the New World Information Communication Order that was in 1984, under the auspices of UNESCO, they took up a whole range of issues with the free flow of information and right to communicate as something that was crucial, not just free speech. Free speech would be already tethered to a certain liberal understanding of freedom of expression that is more capitalist. And there was a theologian in the United States called Reinhold Niebuhr. Niebuhr wrote about some of the dangers of libertarianism, and the debate actually in 1947 there was a committee report called the Hutchins Committee Report in the United States, where they had on the one hand William Hawking, who was advocating for a social responsibility of the press, but there were others like Shafi and others, Zachary Shafi and others who were talking about corporate libertarianism, which you find increasingly the privatized. So the media, role of media, market, and the state, the relationship, the three sort of crucial forces here. So the privatization of media began much earlier, and that is what you see today in India with the rise of neoliberalism in 1970s and 80s, economic globalization, and the Murdochization of Rupert Murdoch, Murdochization of news, infotainment becomes something much more crucial here. So these are the things that actually defined the debates in the 70s and 80s, but UNESCO was still struggling, and particularly in the 1990s with the rise of global capitalism and other privatization and liberalization, you had ITU, International Telecommunication Union, became shifting from the political problems that UNESCO was confronting to more technical issues like the world governance on internet, internet governance, and you have the ICANN and DNS, the crucial things that they're taking up here, and governance becomes a buzzword here, multi-stakeholderism and all of those things actually have risen to the forefront and actually sort of demolished any idea of the media as press as an important instrument, as a fourth sort of within the grand scheme of things. So what I am saying here is to all of you, the question that was posed here is media subverting as a tool of democracy. It actually becomes more challenging in the realm of digital media. Whether they're not, social media is neither social nor media. Facebook is not media. Twitter is not media. Elon Musk is not media. They're not dealing with media. Media is channels of how reporting is done, fact-based, the inverted pyramid style of journalism, where you need to check your facts. It's not opinionated. It is based on facts alone, and that is what we saw in the 40s and 50s and 60s in India with the freedom struggle. And we had great journalists who were writing and investigative journalism at the forefront. But with the social networking sites, with digital media, it becomes difficult to even think about media as quote unquote media, because we need to really put that under sort of erasure, so to speak. Like, we have to put it aside and say these are not media. The function of media is, as I said to you, Maria Reza and Dmitry Muratov, what they did as part of investigative journalism. So what has become of press today? How do you develop robust interconnections between free speech and press freedom? Those are the things that are in front of us. And I think examples of Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, and Reinhold Niebuhr, and also William Hawking would give us some ideas to sort of develop a more robust understanding. We need a new imagination, the new way of engaging with the young people, and developing forms of democracy which are in tune with the digital forms of communication, by which I mean, I don't mean the Facebooks, I don't mean Twitter, I don't mean Snapchat, Reddit. Those are the privatized corporate communication structures. I mean local journalism, which is very vibrant in the United States. The city where I came from, I did my PhD in Minnesota, is something called MinPost. They do a hyper-local journalism where young people, the place where I teach, we have a very solid journalism program where young people go out and interview senators, local legislators in Nashville. They go around and develop their skills, hone their skills. But journalism itself is still a standard bearer for media. So under media, I would consider journalism as primary, press and journalism. But digital forms outside of the ambit of Facebook and Twitter, you find local forms of digital communications that are there. Young people sort of use it in very savvy and very interesting ways. And for them, it is in my own research, I found that in Palestine, I was visiting and doing field work. Young people are questioning their own Arab traditions. They are questioning Israeli occupation, but yet they are producing forms of journalism which are first rate. And I will close here with a couple of comments about contemporary India. It is sad that we use the sedition laws today. The government and all governments use that sedition laws and in terms of bringing putting a pressure on journalists to subjugate them and to sort of put them in prison. Maybe Justice J.V. Ramana the other day said that he was talking about television as kangaroo courts, and also about we need independent journalism that is not media that is not based on people who are in real estate business, business interests, diverse business interests and all that. So there's a lot of works here, in terms of political economy of media. People have done immense research in structural relations in media, particularly if you look at India also. In Telangana also, you look at the television broadcast networks, you will see that they're tethered to very caste-based and highly politicized. So it's difficult to even talk about journalism in that context. So thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
How media can strengthen democracy. So in that sense, I think a media role is known to all of us, but let me list down at least 4. One, it is flagged as a vital factor in generating democratic culture. అంటే ఒక ప్రజాస్వామ్య సంస్కృతిని పెంపొందించడానికి మీడియాకు ఒక ప్రధాన పాత్ర ఉంది అనేది అది మనం అందరం గుర్తించాం.
అది జరుగుతలేదు ఇప్పుడు. దట్స్ వాట్ ఈస్ హ్యాపెనింగ్. ఇన్ఫ్యాక్ట్ మీడియా ఈస్ promoting a anti-democratic culture. I think some of the examples were mentioned here. And I'm not talking of only religious intolerance. There's a lot of general intolerance as well. If you look at the debates which are happening and the way, not only on news channels, I face a lot of those debates, but even in normal public spaces, డెమోక్రటిక్ స్పేసెస్. మనం ఒక జిల్లా పరిషత్ మీటింగ్ చూడండి, శాసనసభ చూడండి, పార్లమెంట్ చూడండి, అది ఇండియా కాదు ఇజ్రాయెల్ ఎక్కడైనా చూడవచ్చు. ఆ డిబేట్ లేకుండా వై దే ఆర్ బిహేవింగ్ ద ఇంటాలరెంట్ వే. అయితే ఆ ఇమేజెస్ని దాన్ని రిపోర్ట్ చేసేటప్పుడు ఈజ్ మీడియా డూయింగ్ ఇట్ consciously or merely presenting what is the truth? సో అక్కడ మనకు ఈ డౌట్ వస్తుంది, మీడియా పాత్ర ఈజ్ ఇట్ ప్రమోటింగ్ డెమోక్రటిక్ కల్చర్. మనకి ఈరోజు ఇఫ్ యు లుక్ అట్ ది ఎంటైర్ ద వే we are living, decisions with regard to our life are happening elsewhere. అంటే గ్లోబల్ నుంచి, నేషనల్ నుంచి, స్టేట్ నుంచి, ఇంకా రకరకాల స్థాయిల్లో డెసిషన్స్ ఆర్ బీయింగ్ టేకెన్ బై డిఫరెంట్ పీపుల్, నాట్ ఓన్లీ లా మేకర్స్. మనం ఎన్నుకున్న ప్రజాప్రతినిధులే కాక అనేక మంది మన జీవితాలకు సంబంధించిన నిర్ణయాలు ఎక్కడెక్కడో తీసుకుంటున్నాం. అది మనకు WTO గ్లోబలైజేషన్, లిబరలైజేషన్, దిలీప్ రెడ్డి గారు అన్నారు, ప్రైవేటైజేషన్ ద్వారా మనకు అది సాధ్యపడింది. అమెరికాలో మేము ఇదివరకు అనేది అమెరికాలో తుమ్మితే మనం ఇక్కడ దగ్గే పరిస్థితి వచ్చిందని. కరోనా తర్వాత వుహాన్లో కరోనా ఇస్తే ఇక్కడ ఉలిక్కిపడ్డాం మనం. ఇప్పుడు కూడా అక్కడెక్కడో మంకీ పాక్స్ వస్తే ఇండియాలో కేవలం 3 కేసులున్నా గ్లోబల్ హెల్త్ ఎమర్జెన్సీ అని WHO డిసైడ్ చేస్తే ఇండియా ఈజ్ నౌ వరీడ్. అంటే డెసిషన్స్ ఎక్కడ జరుగుతుంది, నిర్ణయాలు ఎక్కడ జరుగుతున్నాయి, అమలు ఎక్కడ జరుగుతుంది, దాన్ని మీడియా ఏ విధంగా రిపోర్ట్ చేస్తుంది. ఐ థింక్ దట్స్ వేర్ మీడియా ఇస్ లాస్ట్. వాళ్ళకు కూడా బహుశా అర్థమవుతలేదు ఏమవుతుందో. ఇక డెమోక్రటిక్ స్పేసెస్ గురించి మాట్లాడితే ఉదాహరణ చెప్తారు, WTO వరల్డ్ ట్రేడ్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్. వరల్డ్ ట్రేడ్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్లో మీకు ఎంతమందికి తెలుసు, అన్ని నిర్ణయాలు, ఆల్ డెసిషన్స్ ఆర్ టేకెన్ ఆన్ కాన్సెన్సస్. ఎవ్రీ కంట్రీ హ్యాస్ 1 vote, సింగిల్ ఓట్. ఇక్కడ ఇండియాలో GST కౌన్సిల్, గూడ్స్ అండ్ సర్వీసెస్ ట్యాక్స్కి సంబంధించిన కౌన్సిల్ ఆల్సో హ్యాస్ సింగిల్ ఓట్. అంటే ప్రతి council member including states, and but none of them feel they are powerful to take a decision. So WTO lo decisions anni they go by the power of money, power of trade. So developing countries number ఎక్కువ ఉన్నా కూడా, వాళ్ళ సంఖ్య ఎక్కువ ఉన్నా కూడా, ఓటు వాళ్ళకి సమానంగా ఉన్నా కూడా వాళ్ళకు సంబంధించిన నిర్ణయాలు జరగవు. GSTలో మొన్న ఇన్ఫాక్ట్ సుప్రీంకోర్ట్ has empowered states. సుప్రీంకోర్ట్ అబ్జర్వ్డ్ స్టేట్స్ క్యాన్ రిజెక్ట్ డెసిషన్ టేకెన్ బై GST అని. ఇప్పుడు మొన్న మళ్ళా అదనంగా GST వేస్తే స్టేట్స్ ప్రొటెస్ట్ చేసినాయి కదా, బట్ నన్ ఆఫ్ దెమ్ సెడ్ we will walk out or we don't accept this decision అని అనలే. తెలంగాణ అనలే, ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్ అనలే, తమిళనాడు అనలేదు, వెస్ట్ బెంగాల్ అనలేదు, ఎవరు అనలేదు, విపక్షాల ముఖ్యమంత్రులు. కానీ వాళ్ళ ఫైనాన్స్ మినిస్టర్లు అక్కడ కూర్చుంటారు. సుప్రీంకోర్టు క్లారిఫికేషన్ ఇచ్చినా కూడా అది తీసుకోలేదు. సో ఈ డెమోక్రాటిక్ స్పేసెస్ని, ఆ డెమోక్రసీ లేదు, ఆ డెమోక్రాటిక్ కల్చర్ లేదు, అది ఉండే అవకాశం ఉంది అని ఏ మీడియాలో రిపోర్ట్ అయిందా? ఎక్కడ కాలేదు. So that's what I'm saying. It's a vital factor, but it is not playing that a vital factor. నిన్న మేము ఇక్కడ బండరావిరాలలో ప్రజాభిప్రాయ సేకరణ జరిగితే మీడియా ఉన్నారు అక్కడ. మళ్ళీ మేము మొన్న అయింది, నిన్న ప్రెస్ కాన్ఫరెన్స్ పిలిచి చెప్తే రిపోర్ట్ చేశాను దాని గురించి. బట్ దట్స్ వేర్ ఐఎమ్ సెయింగ్ ఆ మీడియాకున్న బేసిక్ అది జరుగుతలేదు. ఇంకో ఎగ్జాంపుల్ చెప్పి ఐ గో టు ద నెక్స్ట్. కార్టూన్, మనకి పొలిటికల్ కార్టూన్ ఆర్కే లక్ష్మణ్ ఎంత ఇన్సిజివ్ కార్టూనో మనకు తెలుసు. ఈరోజు కార్టూన్లు వేసే వాళ్ళకి అసలు ప్రింట్ మీడియాలో కూడా ఇప్పుడు స్థానం లేదు. క్యారికేచరింగ్ కార్టూనింగ్ ఎవరు అనేస్తే వాళ్ళ మీద ప్రొటెస్ట్ కేసులు నడుస్తుంది. సో దట్ ఇట్ సెల్ఫ్ షోస్ మీడియాలో ఒకవేళ రిపోర్ట్ చేసినా మీడియాని కూడా టార్గెట్ చేసే పరిస్థితి వచ్చింది. సెకండ్, సప్లయింగ్ పొలిటికల్ ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ టు ఓటర్స్ టు డిసైడ్. దిస్ ఇస్ ఆల్సో పార్ట్ ఆఫ్ ది మీడియా రోల్. అంటే ఓటింగ్, మనం ఎలక్షన్స్, డెమోక్రసీలో ఎన్నికలు అవసరం అన్నప్పుడు ఆ ఎన్నికల్లో నిర్ణయించుకోవడానికి ఓటర్లకు అందించే సమాచారము మీడియా చేస్తుందని, దాన్ని కూడా ఎట్లా మ్యానిపులేట్ చేస్తున్నారు మనం చూసినాం. అడ్వర్టైజ్మెంట్స్ ఆఫ్ కోర్స్, కానీ ఆ న్యూస్ కూడా మీకు చాలా మందికి ఇప్పుడు టాప్ పేజ్లో వచ్చే న్యూస్ మోస్ట్ ఆఫ్ దెమ్ ఆర్ స్పాన్సర్డ్ న్యూస్, స్పాన్సర్డ్ ఇన్ వేరియస్ వేస్. సో దిస్ సప్లై ఆఫ్ ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ ఏది ఎప్పుడు తీసుకురావాలా? దిలీప్ రెడ్డి గారు ఎగ్జాంపుల్ చెప్పిండు, తిమ్మరుసు నీ కృష్ణదేవరాయలు ఈ గీతను చిన్నగా చేయాలంటే పెద్ద గీత. మనం ఇప్పుడు ఎన్ని అనాలిసిస్ చూస్తలేం. ఇష్యూ డైవర్షన్కి మన దగ్గరనే చూసినాం. మొన్న వరదలు అయినప్పుడు ఇది డైవర్ట్ చేయడానికి క్లౌడ్ బస్ట్ థియరీ వచ్చింది. మొత్తం ఆ రోజు రైతులంతా కాళేశ్వరం చర్చనే లేదు, మీడియా అంతా క్లౌడ్ బస్ట్, ఆయన మంచోడ, ఆయన ఏంది అదే, అరే అది వద్దురాబాబు మనం వేరే చర్చిద్దామంటే లేదు. సో దట్స్ హౌ మీడియా ఈస్ గెటింగ్ మ్యానిపులేటెడ్. సో సబ్వర్షన్ ఎక్కడైతుందంటే ఇక్కడ. దెన్ ఐడెంటిఫై ప్రాబ్లమ్స్ ఇన్ సొసైటీ. వారు చెప్పారు మన ఫార్మర్స్ ప్రొటెస్ట్ ఇష్యూలో, ఈవెన్ ఐ మానిటర్డ్ ఫ్రమ్ ఎ డిస్టెంట్ పాయింట్. మనకు ఆ రిపోర్టింగ్ చూస్తే నేషనల్ ఛానల్స్ కంప్లీట్లీ లిమిటెడ్. అసలు ద కోర్ రీజన్స్ ఫర్ ఫార్మర్స్ ప్రొటెస్ట్ ఐ డోంట్ థింక్ ఎనీ ఆఫ్ ది నేషనల్ మీడియా ఇస్ రిపోర్టెడ్. ఛానల్స్ కావచ్చు, ప్రింట్ మీడియా కావచ్చు. సో అట్లా అంటే ఎగ్జాంపుల్స్ చాలా ఉన్నాయి. ఎక్కడైతే మనకు సమాజంలో ఉన్న ప్రాథమిక మూల సమస్యలు ఉన్నాయో వాటిని ప్రస్తావించే మీడియా తగ్గిపోతుంది. అండ్ వేరియస్ ఇక్కడ మళ్ళీ ఒకటే మనం మాట్లాడట, మీడియాలో జర్నలిస్ట్ ఆర్ డూయింగ్ ఏ గుడ్ జాబ్, కానీ వీళ్ళు ఫైల్ చేసినాక ఆ ఎడిటరు, సబ్ ఎడిటరు, పైన ఒక ఎడిటరు, వీళ్ళు నిర్ణయిస్తారు ఈ న్యూస్ రావాలన్నా వద్దా, ఈ న్యూస్ ఏ విధంగా రావాలి, ఎంత రావాలి, దాని హెడ్డింగ్ ఏంది, అవంతా వాళ్ళు నిర్ణయిస్తారు. సో అక్కడ మళ్ళీ మన తెలంగాణకు వస్తే, నేను చాలాసార్లు దిలీప్ రెడ్డి గారితో మీరు చూస్తారు, ముఖ్యమంత్రి గారు ఇది అన్నారు, ఓ మీటింగ్ పెట్టారు ఇది అన్నారు అంటే, నేను జర్నలిస్టులని అడిగిన, మీకు ప్రెస్ నోట్ వచ్చిందా? ప్రెస్ నోట్ రాలే, అన్సైన్డ్ ప్రెస్ నోట్ వస్తుంది. ఈ మీడియా అక్కడ పోయి చూడలేదు, ప్రగతి భవన్లో మీటింగ్ జరిగిందా, ముఖ్యమంత్రి అన్నాడా లేదా వాళ్ళకి తెలియదు. ప్రెస్ నోట్ వస్తుంది, దాని సిగ్నేచర్ ఉండదు, లెటర్ హెడ్ ఉండదు, సీఎంఓ నుంచి వస్తుంది. వీళ్ళు సీఎం చెప్పిండు, ఈనాడులో నేను రెగ్యులర్లీ రీడ్ అయినా, ఈనాడులో సీఎం ఈ మాట అన్నాడని రాస్తాడు. ఈజ్ ఇట్ ఆయన ప్రెజెంటింగ్ ట్రూత్? వారు ఇందాక అన్నారు ట్రూత్, ఫ్యాక్ట్. వాట్స్ అ ఫ్యాక్ట్ అండ్ వాట్స్ అ ట్రూత్? సీఎం అన్నాడో లేదా ఈయన చూడలేదు, చూస్తేనే కదా అట్లా, లేదా అన్నాడు అని ప్రెస్ నోట్ అంటుంది అని రాయరు ఎక్కడ, సీఎం అన్నాడు అనే రాస్తారు ఈయన విన్నట్టు. సో అట్లా మ్యానిపులేషన్ ఆఫ్ ది న్యూస్ ఈస్ హ్యాపెనింగ్ అండ్ మీడియా ఈజ్ హ్యాపీలీ ప్లేయింగ్. ఐఎమ్ గివింగ్ వన్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్, తెలంగాణ కాదు మొత్తం దేశవ్యాప్తంగా అట్లా జరుగుతుంది. అండ్ పురుషోత్తం రెడ్డి గారు ముందే అన్నారు, సర్వర్స్ వాచ్ డాగ్స్ అని, ఆ వాచ్ పక్కన పెట్టిండ్రు. దే ఆర్ సర్వింగ్ డాగ్స్ ఆఫ్ కార్పొరేట్ కల్చర్. ఇక దానికి కూడా చాలా చెప్పేవి ఉన్నాయి. అయితే ఐ థింక్ దెర్ ఈస్ ఎ కాంప్లెక్సిటీ విచ్ ఇస్ ఆల్సో కన్ఫ్యూజింగ్ ది జర్నలిస్ట్ ఐ ఫీల్. ఒకటి సైన్స్, టెక్నాలజీ, ట్రేడ్ అండ్ లైవ్లీహుడ్స్, ఇవి పర్యావరణం, ఇవన్నీ చూస్తే వీళ్ళకి సబ్జెక్ట్ నాలెడ్జ్ తక్కువ ఉండి కమ్యూనికేషన్ నేర్చుకుంటారు, బేసిక్స్. ఆ బేసిక్స్ వారు చెప్పినట్టు మీరు ఒక న్యూస్ ప్రజెంట్ చేసేటప్పుడు యూ షుడ్ హ్యావ్ ఎ బ్యాలెన్స్, యూ షుడ్ గివ్ ఆల్ ది వ్యూ పాయింట్స్ ఇన్వాల్వ్డ్ ఇన్ దట్ ఇష్యూ. బట్ యూజువల్లీ దే డోంట్ డూ. కరోనా సమయంలో మనం చూసినాం, కరోనా మీద వాట్ ఎవర్ సైన్స్ అని న్యూస్ ఇచ్చారో, డాక్టర్లని ఇచ్చారో, ఇట్స్ ఆల్ ఫెడ్ బై ఫాల్స్ ప్రాపగాండా మెషిన్ బై బిగ్ ఫార్మా. వీళ్ళు ఎవ్వరు ఎక్కడ క్రాస్ చెకింగ్ కూడా చేయలేరు. మనకు ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకింగ్ అని ఒకటి చెప్తున్నారు ఈ మధ్య కొత్తగా, వీళ్ళు ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకింగే చేయరు. ఓ సైంటిస్ట్ పేపర్ అంటాడు, ఆ పేపర్ అంటే పేపర్ కెన్ బి డన్ ఆన్ వెరీ స్మాల్ శాంపుల్, కానీ అది మొత్తం ప్రపంచానికి ఆపాదించే కంక్లూజన్ సైంటిస్ట్ ఇవ్వడు, కానీ జర్నలిస్ట్ ఇస్తాడు. సో మంకీ పాక్స్ ఓన్లీ ఫర్ బైసెక్షువల్ ఆర్ గేస్కి వస్తుందని మొన్న WHO డైరెక్టర్ జనరల్ అన్నాడు. ఈజ్ ఇట్ సైన్స్ బేస్డ్ క్లెయిమ్ అని ఎవరన్నా ప్రశ్నించరా అంటే తెలియదు. WHO చీఫ్ అన్నాడు కాబట్టి ఇట్ ఈస్ టేకెన్ యాజ్ ఎ సైంటిఫిక్ ఫ్యాక్ట్, అండ్ దట్స్ అ ప్రాబ్లం. ఆ టెక్నాలజీ కూడా అట్లే. ఈ టెక్నాలజీ డిస్టార్షన్ ఎట్లా అంటే రోజు 10 వస్తుంటాయి. ఇప్పుడు నా మొబైల్లో పొద్దున నేను ఒకటి కొడితే, నేను బిల్ గేట్స్ అని కొడితే ఇక నాకు సంవత్సరం పొడవు బిల్ గేట్స్ సంబంధించి న్యూస్ వస్తుంది, నేను అడిగినా అడగకుండా. బట్ మనమేమనుకుంటాం, ఇదే ట్రెండింగ్ న్యూస్ అని మేము అనుకునే పరిస్థితి ఉంది. సో జర్నలిస్ట్ కానీ అన్ఇనిషియేటెడ్, ఐ థింక్ దే ఆర్ ఆల్ కన్ఫ్యూజ్ సమ్ టైమ్స్ ఐ ఫీల్. సో దిస్ ఎన్మెషింగ్ ఆఫ్ సైన్స్, టెక్నాలజీ, ట్రేడ్, ఇంకా ట్రేడ్ గురించి అయితే పెద్ద చాలా ఇష్యూస్ ఉన్నాయి, విచ్ మీడియా కంప్లీట్లీ అన్ఫోకస్డ్. మనకు చెప్పనే చెప్పదు. మనకి ఇప్పుడు ఇన్ఫ్లేషన్ వస్తుంది, ఇన్ఫ్లేషన్ ఎందుకు వచ్చింది అనేది ఇండియన్ మీడియా నాట్ రిపోర్టెడ్ ప్రాపర్లీ. ఈవెన్ క్రూడ్ ఆయిల్ ప్రైజెస్ ఎందుకు పెరుగుతున్నాయి, ఎందుకు తగ్గుతున్నాయి, అందులో రిలయన్స్ అండ్ అదర్ ప్రైవేట్ ప్లేయర్స్ ఒక పాత్ర ఎక్కడో ఒక ఆర్టికల్లో వస్తుంది, కానీ మన మీడియా అయితే పికప్ చేయదు. సో దే విల్ టెల్ యూ ఓన్లీ వన్ ఇష్యూ. బీజేపీ టీఆర్ఎస్ని తిట్టింది, టీఆర్ఎస్ బీజేపీని తిట్టింది, నువ్వు ట్యాక్స్ తగ్గాలి, నువ్వు ట్యాక్స్, అక్కడే ఉంటారు తప్పితే ద లార్జర్ ఇష్యూ ఇస్ నాట్ రిపోర్టెడ్ ఆర్ నాట్ అనలైజ్డ్ అట్ ఆల్. సో ఇట్లాంటి చాలా ఇష్యూస్ ఉంటాయి. సో ఒక జస్ట్ రెడ్ ఏ పేపర్, ఐ థాట్ ఐ విల్ గివ్ యూ దట్ theory of subversion of media. The paper was on that, and that author lists 4 vulnerabilities of media. One, individual political messaging. So political messaging లో I think individualization పెరుగుతుంది. అది అందుకే ఇప్పుడు మనకు ఈ ఘర్షణ జరుగుతుంది. నా ఫోటో ఆడుందా, ప్రైమ్ మినిస్టర్ ఎందుకు ఉంది, నీ ఫోటో ఎందుకు ఉంది, ప్రోటోకాల్ ఆయన పక్కన నుండి ఈయన ఎందుకు లేడు, ఈ ప్రోటోకాల్ అని పేరు మీద ఇండివిజువల్ పొలిటికల్ మెసేజింగ్ ఎక్కువైపోయి. సో బోత్ వేస్ మీడియా ఈజ్ ఫీడింగ్ దట్ ప్రాసెస్ అండ్ దే ఆర్ ఆల్సో వల్నరబుల్ టు దట్ ప్రెషర్స్ coming out of that political culture. So that's another. Second is group dynamics and polarization. I think this is happening across the world. Polarization, which we are seeing now in India, along religious lines or along స్టేక్ హోల్డర్ మనం చాలా మంది ట్రేడ్ ఇష్యూస్లో కూడా వీ హ్యావ్ లాట్ ఆఫ్ పోలరైజేషన్. మనం అంటాం కదా, ఇందాక వారు అన్నారు పే చెక్ ఈజ్ ఇంపార్టెంట్, బట్ పే చెక్ 20 years back did not define democratic values, but today it is defined. ఆ 20 లక్షలు నెలకి తీసుకుంటున్న మీడియా ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్ ఈజ్ మోర్ వల్నరబుల్ టు subversion than a journalist who is working at 15,000, 20,000 rupees, because that's a culture, individual culture. So, but today we think paycheck can define the culture antunam somewhere. We are trying to legitimize that. So I think that kind of polarization is the issue. Of course, third is the platform algorithms. I think Professor Sanjay was mentioning this digital media, Facebook. I think now Facebook is credited with influencing elections in India, in America, and I think even Israel through their algorithms. And today that PK, SK, all those people, I think their entire business is based on how they manipulate these platform algorithms. So that's now has become a business. So I think that's a third factor which is seen as a vulnerability. Fourth, final is falsehood dissemination. I think that's now WhatsApp or all these digital platforms are quickly sending it out. Falsehood. ఇప్పుడైతే మీడియా, నేను ఈవెన్ సమ్టైమ్స్ ఐ ఫాల్ టు దట్ falsehood, even though I try to rationalize whatever videos come to me, whatever news comes to me, but still some news I think it might be true. So this falsehood has become a very critical situation, and so now we have news meter, this always try to say this is the fact, this is the falsehood, and I think number of media houses are now trying to set up a fact checking mechanism, but even fact checking is also now infiltrated. So how do you trust this fact checking by a media? So ultimately these are the four vulnerabilities which have been identified in this modern situation where media becomes a subversion tool to decimate democracy. So ఇండియాలో of course regulation issue వచ్చింది. Just a few more points. Regulation, Pawan, I think he mentioned it first, and then Kota Nilima also. Pawan was talking about cost of regulation. మనం ఇంత మీద మీడియాని రెగ్యులేట్ చేయగలుగుతామా, దానికి ఎంత ఖర్చు అవుతుంది? అండ్ సమ్వేర్ షీ వాస్ సేయింగ్ నో రెగ్యులేషన్ కాన్, సెల్ఫ్ రెగ్యులేషన్. సో మై పాయింట్ ఈజ్ మన కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్లో ఐ థింక్ దట్స్ అ వెరీ బ్యూటిఫుల్లీ డన్, వేర్ దే క్రియేటెడ్ ఎ బ్యాలెన్స్ అండ్ a checks and balance. So when you are talking of 4 pillars of democracy, we had this checks and balances between the 4 pillars. And a media can check judiciary, media can check executive, media can check lawmakers, and vice versa. Sorry? Media? I was coming to that. In fact, I think this week one Supreme Court judge, and in fact yesterday Chief Justice remarked, their angst against social media, which is doing a media trial of court cases. అయితే కోర్టు తన పని చేయకుండా ఈయన రోజు 15 స్పీచ్లు బయట ఇచ్చొస్తాడు, కానీ కోర్టులు కేసులు ఉన్నాయి, 7 లక్షల కేసులు ఉన్నాయి అంటే దే ఆర్ నాట్ గివింగ్ జస్టిస్, దే ఆర్ నాట్ డూయింగ్ దేర్ వర్క్. సో మీడియా చేస్తుంది. మనం జూబ్లీ హిల్స్ కేసులో చూసినాం, ఇఫ్ ద మీడియా వాజ్ నాట్ రిపోర్టింగ్ ఆన్ ఎ అవర్లీ బేసిస్, ఐ డోంట్ థింక్ దోస్ గైస్ వుడ్ హ్యావ్ బీన్ అరెస్టెడ్ దెన్ ఇట్స్ అప్పటికే ఆ వారం రోజుల డిలే అయింది. సో మీడియాలో వాట్ ఎవర్ దే ఫీల్ ట్రయల్ ఆ మీడియాలో వచ్చినాకనే యాక్షన్ మొదలైంది. సో మీడియా ఇఫ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ మేబీ గోయింగ్ బియాండ్ ఇట్స్ రెమిట్ ఆఫ్ రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ, బట్ if the other pillar is not working, this is a question I think all of us have to ponder. If on the 4 pillars, if one pillar is not working, can't media question that? Then can we everything can we say as a media trial antama? So akkada limits emanna untayante that we can discuss. So I think that's still a big question. So I feel regulation, I go with Dr. Neelima, what he said. Self-regulation is better, but with enough checks and balances, I think that's possible. But ultimately, finally, what we want to happen, so we want media to get strengthened. So ikkada the business model of media, so media in general, not just his aversion to social media, Facebook is not media, iyanni modalu pedithe in general media business model is now completely based on the transactional business. The Guardian is trying to get out of that. They are asking contributions and they are trying to build their own contributing subscribers. Atla chala the wire undi. They are trying to be independent of advertisements. So I think this business model will give us an idea of where that particular media is heading. So I think we need to start understanding that, and maybe more analytical work has to happen so that we can look at what kind of solutions can emerge out of such analysis.
Sir, from what we have heard from the distinguished panel speakers, it is very evident that basically if you take the print media or the network news media, apart from the editorial bias, it is the authenticity or the credibility of the news reporters, the byline, or the talk show host or the news or host, which carries a lot of weight. That does the fact checking. We rely on their fact checking. But nowadays, as Professor Asthana said, the young do not follow the news channels or the print media, but they do follow the information superhighway. So all these digital media, news media like Breitbart in the US, or you have the Op India, the print, and everybody knows that editorial bias. But here you don't have any byline at all. I mean, can't we mandate that there should be a byline so that automatically some sort of self-checking goes in? There has to be some regulation. We can't say that it is muzzling the press or this thing. It's as Professor Asthana said, you put too much power into their hands. It basically is Goebbelian propaganda. That's what it is. So you need to muzzle that.
So I could walk into a Hindu office and sit with a journalist and discuss with him the issue. Today, if you look at the structure of the media offices, they are all cubicles, I just can't sit with any journalist. And entering itself is a big problem. Why and how is there? And I don't think that journalists will have the freedom to talk to that. Second, I think now schedules, I think the time given for the particular journalist to develop a story has become short because of competition from news channels. Today morning there is a flood and this news channel guy, just a photographer goes there and reports it from there. But a print journalist, he can't do that. He has to go there, talk to people, write. So sometimes one day is not enough. But then the management, and they have this anxiety, competition anxiety. So they try to pressurize. So there, I think the byline are not emerging. In fact, nowadays I don't think he can clarify. Even journalists are not insisting my name has to come.
Yeah, so that question of byline is very important though, meaning I might want to just give an example from US because I teach there, but in Hyderabad also I have not seen that. Say for instance, for us, some of my colleagues who teach journalism, the thing is that we need to really empower the audience. When I say audience, the young readers, and an intergenerational issue, media education and media literacy have to become a very key thing. And as part of the UNESCO, I was one of the co-authors of a report called Media Information Literacy that was published in 2013, where we argued that young people need to really inculcate, and very early on in the curriculum, right from middle school onward, because young kids are already on the tablets and on cell phones, so they need to know that media is a construction. Media is something that, when I say media, again I have a problem with the word media, because it's social networking is not media. Elon Musk is not media business, he's doing something else. The question is, how do we empower young people? How do we empower others also who are older people to really sift through the information? Because there's a whole disinformation which my colleagues spoke about. It's a global problem. It is in Poland, it is in Hungary, it is in Germany, it is in Austria, it's in India. And particularly that whole idea of disinformation and hate speech and all of that sort of is spewed through digital networking sites. It's difficult to regulate or control that. But if it is in a journalistic enterprise where print-based media, it's difficult to do that. You can't get away with that, at least in the United States.
Particularly this conventional media like print media and television, of late this digital media to some extent is having the mechanism of cross-checking and fact checking and disseminating into the public domain. That's the gatekeeper system is there. But after proliferation of this social media, they are not the primary producers of the news. They most of the times they will borrow the news from different sources, and they are the only intermediaries. They provide a platform for the dissemination. So that's why they are promoting citizen journalism. Anybody can report. Such all things will come on that platform. So that's why the regulation will be very typical for even the government agencies. Basically the media itself will oppose that control by the government or the corporate. It must be a self-regulatory, as Nilimaji rightly said, that was for the several decades they are saying that we will keep our own Lakshmana Rekha. But incidentally, because of this social media platforms, they has not been able to do no checking. If it comes to their notice, simply they are putting WhatsApp lo పెట్టేస్తారు, అది ఇంకోని పోతుంది, ఇంకోని 20 చైన్లలో పోతుంది, 5 నిమిషాల లోపల మొత్తం ప్రపంచం వెళ్ళిపోతుంది. Then they will realize that this is not true. This is a false. This is fabricated. This is deliberately, intentionally to do political favor to one political party. This has been generated by a group of people. తెలిసి ఏం లాభం, అప్పటికే వెళ్ళిపోయి ఉంటుంది కొన్ని వేలు లక్షల మంది. So that is happening. సో దానికి ఇందాక మన వాళ్ళు చెప్పినట్టుగానే perceptional wrongs are there, conceptual errors are there, and factual mistakes are there, and professional inefficiency also there. They don't know. క్లౌడ్ బర్స్ట్ అయింది అని ఒక పెద్ద మనిషి అంటే మీడియాలో ఉన్న వాళ్ళు అక్కడే క్లౌడ్ బర్స్ట్ ఫర్ 10 long days అవుతుందా? 10 long days జరగదు సార్. అది వర్షం అంత పొడవునా పడిందంటే ఇది క్లైమేట్ చేంజ్ తప్ప. క్లౌడ్ బర్స్ట్ అంటే అప్పటికప్పుడు మేఘాలు విచ్చిత్ అయిపోయి ఒక నెల రోజులో సంవత్సరం వర్షం ఒక గంటలో పడితే దాన్ని క్లౌడ్ బర్స్ట్ అనగలిగిన నాలెడ్జ్ జర్నలిస్టులకు ఉంటే దట్ కౌంటర్ విల్ కమ్ దేర్. ఇట్స్ వేర్ ఇట్ ఈస్ జనరేటింగ్. ఇది అటెన్షన్ డైవర్షన్ కోసం ఒక పొలిటీషియన్, ఒక ఇండస్ట్రియలిస్టో ఎవరో ఒకటి ఫేక్ న్యూస్ పబ్లిక్ డొమైన్లో వదులుతుంటే, ఇఫ్ ద జర్నలిస్ట్ ఇస్ ప్రొఫెషనల్ అండ్ ఈస్ హావింగ్ నాలెడ్జ్ ఆఫ్ ఒకప్పుడు అనేది జర్నలిస్ట్ ఇస్ జాక్ ఆఫ్ ఆల్ మాస్టర్ ఆఫ్ నన్. చాలా విషయాల గురించి వాళ్ళకి అవగాహన ఉంటుంది అని. ఎప్పుడు అది నడవదు. చాలా విషయాల గురించి తెలిసి ఏ ఒక్క విషయమైనా లోతుగా తెలియకపోతే జర్నలిస్ట్ కాడు. జర్నలిస్ట్ అట్లీస్ట్ 2-3 subjects he must be master over that subject. Then they must be a క్వశ్చన్. అక్కడ డిజమినేషన్ పాయింట్లోనే కనుక కంట్రోల్ చేయగలిగితే మీడియా ఇంకా కొంచెం కాన్సెప్చువల్లీ, పర్సెప్షనల్లీ అండ్ ప్రొఫెషనల్లీ ఇంకా మోర్ క్వాలిఫై అయితే ఈ ఫేక్ న్యూస్ని ప్రివెంట్ చేయడానికి స్కోప్ ఉంటుంది.
I think social media is also part of media. This we cannot, ఈ పాయింట్ మనం we cannot dilute this. ఒప్పుకుంటా కదా? ఎందుకంటే see, one is the fact that the mainstream media, ఎందుకంటున్నానండి నేను, the mainstream media has failed to do its job. వాళ్ళు ఇష్యూల్ని కవర్ చేయకపోతే మనకి ఇప్పుడు ఫ్లడ్స్ వచ్చాయి తెలంగాణలో, మరి దాన్ని మీరు హెడ్లైన్స్ తీయకపోతే ఎవరో చేస్తే అక్కడ ఉన్నవాళ్ళు, వాళ్ళకి యాక్సెస్ ఉన్నవాళ్ళు, వాళ్ళు ఫేస్బుక్ ఉన్నవాళ్ళు వాళ్ళు చేస్తారు కదా. See, I'm saying that there are two sides to everything అండి. The social media requires a certain amount of structure. దానికి స్ట్రక్చర్ లేకుండా to disseminate anything is counterproductive. రాంగ్స్ కూడా ఆయన చెప్పినట్టు రాంగ్స్ కూడా చాలా ప్రమోట్ అవుతాయి. తప్పులు తడిగులు అబద్ధాలు కూడా చాలా అవ్వచ్చు. లైస్ మైట్ బి సెంట్ యాజ్ ట్రూత్. బట్ ఎట్ ద సేమ్ టైమ్ it is because of the failure of the mainstream media that social media, Twitter, Facebook, they are all getting popular. Why do young people go on Facebook and Twitter andi? Because they know there is more to the headlines. వాళ్ళు చూస్తున్న టీవీ న్యూస్ పేపర్ హెడ్లైన్స్ చూసి they are not satisfied that this is the truth. They want to know the real truth. That's why they go on Facebook, Twitter. దాన్ని రెగ్యులేట్ చేయాలి. I agree, they are corporate platforms. అక్కడ కూడా నిజం చెప్పడం కుదరదు. These platforms are also in the hands of the powerful and the wealthy, same people who are controlling the media. But if the media were doing a job which they are supposed to do, balance their news, views, everything, then people would go less and less on Facebook and social media. But I'll submit that social media is equally powerful media today, which has brought democracy to every single citizen, freedom of expression to every single citizen, and it is a valuable tool.
Legends like Palagumi Sainath, when he talks about poverty, agrarian migration, drought, solid ground field work based in a framework of sociology, economics, everything like that. Or you take a GK ready on international affairs. But when you look at the network news, there is no, apart from the talk show hosts, which becomes a circus, there is no, there is no Anderson Cooper doing a political, news at prime time. It's all in bits and pieces. You just have these headlines. I mean, that again takes away the credibility in Indian news network. This is just an idea that you should probably evolve to that. If you take the US networks or even European networks, they have the credibility, they have the validation.
Yes, sir.
To some extent, there is a constant. There is a constancy. There is a factor which is constant, right? Here you don't know who's your reporter. They are replaceable. They are expendable. So therefore, the fear. You are not allowed to build up your own identity, right?
Thank you.
So there is no democracy, there is no media. But who is responsible? Citizens. Very rightly, you have used collusion, the word. You have used polarization. Today the situation is the bane of bane, sapam. Indian democracy entered. Polarization has entered our drawing rooms. Now I have to exert myself to convince my son that what is happening in India is not good for the health of India, or democratic health of India, or idea of India. It takes lot of effort, and I am at my level, very small person, trying to convince people. I am very surprised that senior citizens, I am 65, there are people who are aged 75 and 80 talking in a very, very narrow-minded fashion, always in terms of religion, caste, everything.
I'm just remembering a former election commissioner T.N. Session once said, while addressing a gathering in Trivandrum, that he said, press is a shame to society. They are third-class people asking fourth-class questions, reporting fifth-class shit. Now, referring to Dr. Neelima, who said, there is no problem with journalism as such, but there is a problem with the journalist. Yes, she is very, very true. It's not the system that is bad and all the systems are good. The people who are in the system and the people who run the system is a problem. Just because of these few individuals in those systems, the entire journalism profession, fraternity has been getting very, very wrong image. Imagine a day without a media. When newspapers were not coming during the corona times, and social media had a jolly ride. My question to her is, ma'am, you are very true, but do you have any suggestions how to improvise or how to empower journalists?
Is it a big reach to people, or it is confined to your analysis, to your institution?
First question, how do we empower journalists? I remember, and my tribute to a lot of journalists who died during COVID. వాళ్ళు ఎందుకు మరణించారంటే they were on the field అండి, and that was the difference between some kind of journalists and other. వాళ్ళు accreditation లేదు కొంతమందికి, వాళ్ళు రూరల్ ఏరియాస్ లో రిపోర్ట్ చేసేవాళ్ళు. they were reporting from rural areas, many of them did not have accreditation, they were reporting about COVID, they died. We kept a record of that. About 1,000 people died. According to our research, 1,000 people in India died covering COVID. Journalists. Many of them got relief. A lot of them did not get relief because the government gives accredited journalist support. Na submission endante, don't wait for government accreditation. Government accrediting a journalist means recognizing a journalist. They recognize who they want to, they don't want to recognize others. There has to be a social responsibility towards journalists. There has to be a civic responsibility to journalists. Mere journalist, if you appreciate a journalist for doing a brave, courageous story, investigating powerful people, they will feel strong. It's not always about money. It's about support. When they take responsibility and fight, let's stand by them. That's the best way to empower. Now I hope I answered your question. The second question on the spread. Yes, I think a lot of media houses have adopted our methodology. To give you some examples, like Barkadat, for instance, has constantly referred to our research while talking about what the media has been, how it has been covering, etc. Especially whenever there is a judicial issue in Supreme Court, or an issue which is raised, like for instance what Ramana Garu has just said, our research comes into play. So yes, it has been widely referred, but it depends on the people to reach out to these tools. It's not for any profit. It is available. It is a public available information. So people have to come and see and use it and understand what are they consuming when you watch news. What are you consuming? Adi meer chutanki you have to make the initiative.
Thank you, Neelima garu.
Thankful to all the distinguished speakers on the dais for taking out their valuable time in delivering and giving their valuable ideas about the present context challenges of media. Once again, thank you so much.